Hello again. Happy Saturday, June the 6th, 2020, and welcome back to my main channel here on YouTube. So this video lesson's main topic is a comparison between the federal systems of Central Europe. All of them have German as their main language. Indeed, German is the only official language of both Austria and Germany, while Switzerland has also three other official languages: French, Italian, and Romansh, or Retro-Romansh. So they are all federal republics. There are some major differences between them. Switzerland overall gives its federal units, which are called cantons, so similar to states, federal states or provinces, the largest measure of self-government. Austria, despite also being a federal republic, gives its federal states the least measure of self-government, and then Germany is somewhere in between the two. All three are classified as parliamentary democracies, but there are some major differences again. Switzerland uses referendums or direct votes on legislative proposals put forward by eligible voters, or then votes on actual pieces of legislation passed by the legislators. It uses those referendums extensively. Austria rarely uses them, and referendums are almost unknown in Germany. Then another major difference concerns the number of the heads of state. In Austria and in Germany, there is only one head of state, who is called the federal president, Bundespräsident if the federal president is a man, Bundespräsidentin if the federal president is a woman. So far, neither country has elected a single female president. In both Germany and Austria, the head of government is the federal chancellor, basically the prime minister. Bundeskanzler if the federal chancellor is a man, Bundeskanzlerin if the federal chancellor is a woman. So far, both Austria and Germany have only once had a female federal chancellor. In Germany, she is still in office. Christian Democrat Angela Merkel, who has been in office since 2005, but has already promised to retire from politics in 2021, when Germany will hold its next federal parliamentary elections. In Austria, there was a caretaker federal chancellor from May 2019 until January 2020, when the current federal chancellor to power. But in Switzerland, there is a fusion of directorial, parliamentary, and presidential forms of government. And what do I mean by this? There are at the same time 7 heads of state. They are formally called federal councillors, but they more properly should be called federal cabinet ministers, because that is what they are. And then the federal presidency rotates every year. So every year, Switzerland has a new nominal federal president and therefore head of state. And normally the rotation goes like this. Each year's vice president will be the following president. And at the same time, Switzerland has these 7 heads of state, one of whom is then the nominal head of state or federal president. There is no separate head of state outside the federal cabinet, or as it's formally called, the federal council. However, in the normal presidential republics, the government in Switzerland is responsible to the legislature. The legislature at the federal level, composed of the National Assembly and the Council. Yeah, I'll have to check that one. Sorry. Yeah, the National Council and the Council of States. And those are the two houses of the Swiss federal parliament. The National Assembly is elected for 4 years by a system of proportional representation from multi-member constituencies. It has 200 members. The Council of States is elected also for 4 years, and in most of the cantons, proportional representation is used. It has only 46 members. Also, Austria and Germany have federal bicameral parliaments. Yeah, regarding the names, yeah, the federal parliament is officially called in Switzerland's 4 official languages Bundesversammlung, Assemblée Fédérale, Assemblea Federale, and Assemblea Federala, or Federal Assembly. Okay, sorry, I have to correct the name of Switzerland's lower house of federal parliament. It is National Council, or Nationalrat in German. Yeah, Nationalrat in German, Conseil National in French, Consiglio Nazionale in Italian, and Conseil National in Romansh. After the October 2019 federal parliamentary elections, there are the following parties represented in the Swiss National Council. The right-wing National Conservative Populist, largely anti-immigrant and also largely anti-Islam, Swiss People's Party with 53 parliamentarians. Then there is the center-left Social Democratic Party with 39 members of parliament. Then the liberal centrist Free Democratic Party with 29 members. The environmentalist Green Party, the main Green Party, that is, with 28 members. The center-right Swiss Christian Democratic Party, or Christian Democratic People's Party, with 25 members. Then there's another Green Party, the Green Liberal Party, with 16 members. The Conservative Democratic Party of Switzerland has 3 members, as does the Evangelical People's Party, another Christian Democratic Party with 3 members. Then there's the Ticino League, a regionalist national conservative party with 1 member. Then the Solidarité, a far-left political party with 1 member. The Swiss Party of Labour, a communist party with 1 member. And the Federal Democratic Union of Switzerland, a national conservative party, which only has 1 member. After the federal parliamentary elections of October 2019, the Swiss Council of States, Ständerat, Conseil des États, Consiglio degli Stati, and Conseil dels Stadis has 46 members, composed of 13 members of the Christian Democrats, 12 members of the Free Democrats, 9 Social Democrats, and then 6 Swiss People's Party's members, 1 independent, and 5 Greens. In Austria, the upper house of the federal parliament is called, like in Germany, Bundesrat or Federal Council. The lower house is called Nationalrat or National Council. The government is only responsible to the National Council in Austria. The National Council is by far the more powerful of the 2 chambers of parliament, while in Switzerland and in Germany, technically at least, the 2 houses of parliament are equal. All laws have to be passed or approved by both houses of the federal parliament in both Switzerland and Austria, but in both Switzerland and Germany. However, in Austria, except in the case of constitutional amendments and changes to the federal state's powers, the Federal Council only exercises a suspensive veto. In other words, it can delay laws in most cases, but not prevent them from being passed. So by repassing the law, the Austrian National Council can override the Austrian Federal Council's veto. The Austrian National Council has 183 members, while the Austrian Federal Council has 61 members. The Austrian National Council is elected by a system of proportional representation from multi-member constituencies. There are 43 constituencies, and there is a federal vote threshold of 4%, meaning that those parties and electoral alliances that fall below the 4% vote threshold normally do not win any seats. Although theoretically it's still possible for them to win at least 1 seat from any of Austria's 43 electoral districts. In practice, this very rarely happens. By contrast, the 9 state legislatures of Austria elect the 61 members of the Federal Council. So the Federal Council is indirectly elected in Austria and especially in Germany, where the 16 federal states, or actually federal state governments, indirectly elect or appoint the 69 members of the German Federal Council. And in contrast to the members of the Council of States in Switzerland and to the members of the Federal Council in Austria, the members of Germany's Federal Council have to vote in bloc. In other words, each state delegation, depending on population consisting of either 3, 4, 5, or 6 delegates, must agree on how to vote, whether to vote for a proposal or against a proposed law, that is. If a state delegation cannot agree on how to vote, it must abstain, which in practice normally has the same effect as voting against a proposal. In addition, depending on the party composition of the state delegation or state delegations rather, of Germany's Federal Council, the state delegations are classified as either government, opposition, or neutral. Government, if they contain the same parties as Germany's federal cabinet does, so currently the Christian Democrats and Social Democrats. Opposition, if the delegates all belong to parties that are in the opposition in the Bundestag, the lower house of the German federal parliament. Or neutral, if at least one state delegation party is in the federal government, and at least one other party is in the federal opposition. And since Germany does not have parliamentary elections only in the same years as the federal parliamentary elections are held, but the state parliamentary or legislative elections are held often in different years, the composition of the Bundesrat or federal council changes frequently. Also in Austria, the state legislative elections often occur in years different from the federal parliamentary elections. And likewise in Switzerland. However, in Switzerland, the federal parliamentary election dates or years are fixed. They occur every 4 years. In Germany, they are almost fixed because it is very difficult in Germany to proclaim early parliamentary elections. At the federal level, this requires first that the incumbent federal chancellor or prime minister, that is the head of Germany's federal cabinet, asks the Bundestag, the lower house of federal parliament, for a vote of confidence. The Bundestag refuses to give him or her a vote of confidence, and during the next 3 weeks, the Bundestag fails to elect a new federal chancellor. Because in Germany, in order for the head of government to take office, he or she must be formally elected or confirmed in power by over half of the legislators at the federal level. This means over half of the Bundestag's members. At the state level, over half of the Landtags or state legislatures members must confirm the Ministerpräsident or state premier in office. There is no such confirmation vote needed in Austria. At least not formally, the federal chancellor or the state premier or Landeshauptmann in Austria simply has to be able to form a functioning majority government. In the Austrian federal states, virtually always these state governments are coalition governments composed of 2 or more parties. And at the federal level, the coalition governments are also the rule. And while in Germany, the head of government, so the federal chancellor at the federal level, the state premier at the state level, can only be voted out of office through a so-called constructive vote of no confidence, where at the federal level, over half of the Bundestag's members simultaneously vote to dismiss or fire the current federal chancellor and to elect a new federal chancellor who has been proposed by the opposition parties. And at the state level, the Ministerpräsident or state premier can only be replaced if over half of the Landtags or state legislatures members simultaneously vote against the Ministerpräsident and then for a new Ministerpräsident proposed by the opposition. In Switzerland, technically there is a vote of confidence after the newly elected federal parliament assembles. The 7 federal councillors are elected by the National Council, the lower house of federal parliament, and technically it's possible for them to be dismissed through a vote of no confidence in the National Council, but this virtually never happens. On a couple of occasions only has an incumbent federal councillor seeking re-election failed to win the required simple majority in the Swiss National Council. And at the cantonal level, theoretically never is there a vote of no confidence, even though it's possible for members of the cantonal cabinet to fail to get re-elected, which is a form of a vote of no confidence. But in Austria, at any moment, a simple majority of the National Council's members at the federal level can vote to force the federal chancellor and his or her cabinet to resign. And at the Austrian state level, at any moment, a simple majority in the state legislature can vote to likewise dismiss the Landeshauptmann or state premier and his or her cabinet. And this has occasionally happened. However, at the federal level, very seldom during the Second Austrian Republic since 1945 has a federal chancellor had to resign because of a vote of no confidence. The only case that I can now think of offhand happened in May 2019 because already the right-wing coalition government between the center-right Austrian People's Party and the National Conservative Populist largely anti-immigrant and largely anti-Islam and Eurosceptic Austrian People's Party had already broken down due to the publication of the scandalous Ibiza video in 2017, where the Freedom Party's leader at the time, Heinz Christian Strache, was apparently discussing ways in which Russia could help finance the Freedom Party's 2017 federal parliamentary election campaign. For some reason, that video only surfaced 2 years later in May 2019, was widely condemned and caused the resignation of Mr. Strache, who at the time was serving as the Austrian Vice Chancellor or Federal Vice Prime Minister, and another high-ranking official of the Austrian Freedom Party, and it also caused the announcement of a breakup of that coalition. But redundantly, the Austrian National Council still in late May 2019 voted to dismiss Federal Chancellor Sebastian Kurz. And then Federal President Alexander van der Bellen appointed a caretaker government of civil servants to serve as the cabinet ministers until the formation of a new government. So after the latest Austrian parliamentary elections, which were held in September 2019, the Austrian National Council has the following parties. The Austrian People's Party with 71 parliamentarians out of 183. The Social Democrats have 40 members. The Freedom Party has 31. The Greens have 26. The New Austrian Liberal Forum, or NEOS, a centrist and liberal party, has 15 seats. And currently, the Austrian Federal Council has the following parties. The Austrian People's Party has 23 federal councillors out of 61. The Greens have 4. The Social Democrats have 20, and the Freedom Party has 14. Then the German Bundestag, Federal Diet, or the German Federal Parliament's lower house. Curiously enough, its number of total members keeps changing. Why? Because of the electoral system. Because if a political party wins more direct seats, in other words, single-member constituency seats elected according to the single-member plurality or first-past-the-post system, where all that a candidate needs to win a seat is to get the largest number of votes, not necessarily a majority. Anyway, in Germany, in the federal elections and likewise the state elections, or at least the federal parliamentary elections, if a political party wins a higher percentage of these constituency seats than its share of the vote cast for the constituency seats would entitle it to win, it is allowed to keep these so-called overhang seats. So that's why the current German Bundestag has 709 members, the largest number under the German Federal Republic's history. And indeed, during the previous democratic regime in Germany, the Weimar Republic, the Reichstag, as the German federal parliament's lower house was then called, never contained as many members as the current Bundestag does. Then the remainder of the Bundestag's members are elected from party lists according to at least one constituency. Can a political party enter the vote? There is one loophole. If a party manages to elect at least 3 constituency members of the Bundestag, it will receive a proportional share of members, even if its federal share of the parliamentary elections vote falls below 5%. This most recently happened in 1994 when the Party of Democratic Socialism, the main predecessor of today's Left Party, able to elect 4 district members to the Bundestag, and their proportional share of members of the Bundestag. So the current composition is as follows. The Christian Democrats have 246 members out of 709. The Social Democrats have 152. The right wing to far right, national conservative, populist, largely anti-immigrant and anti-Islam and Eurosceptic Alternative for Germany has 89 members of the Bundestag. The liberal, business-oriented and strongly pro-European Union Free Democrats have 80 members. The left has 69 members, 67 members, and there are 6 officially independent members of the Bundestag. The Bundesrat has the following composition according to Wiki. In other words, only in those 3 federal states are the governing parties the same as in the federal cabinet. In other words, the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats. Lower Saxony or Niedersachsen with its 6 delegates, Mecklenburg-Vorpommern or Mecklenburg-Front Pomerania, 3 members. I think that the current federal Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, is from there. And then on the German-French border, Saarland, 3 delegates. The remainder, 57 delegates, are neutral, come from German federal states where at least one governing party is the same as in the federal cabinet, and at least one government party is different from that of the federal cabinet. So Baden-Württemberg with its 6 delegates, Bavaria likewise 6 delegates, North Rhine-Westphalia 6 delegates, Hesse 5 delegates, Rhineland-Palatinate 4 delegates, Berlin, the German capital, 4 delegates, Saxony 4 delegates, Schleswig-Holstein 4 delegates, Brandenburg 4 delegates, Saxony-Anhalt 4 delegates, Thuringia 4 delegates, Hamburg 3 delegates, Bremen 3 delegates. So this means that the current federal cabinet of Federal Chancellor Angela Merkel has to maneuver a lot and negotiate in order to be able to persuade the Bundesrat to accept its legislative proposals. Now for the actual comparison of those countries' federal systems. Let's start with Austria. I'll probably have to go. Okay. Forum of Federations. So forumfed.org/countries/Austria/. So theoretically, Austria and officially Austria is a federal republic. It has the following 9 federal states from the west to the east. Vorarlberg on the Swiss border, then Tyrol, which also borders on Switzerland, Salzburg, Carinthia or Kärnten, Upper Austria or Oberösterreich, Styria or Steiermark, then Lower Austria or Niederösterreich, Vienna or Wien, the capital, and then on the country's eastern border with Hungary and slightly also Croatia, Burgenland. In terms of the populations, as of January 2020, Vienna, Lower Austria, Upper Austria, and Styria all have over 1 million inhabitants. Vienna has over 1.9 million, Lower Austria over 1.6 million, Upper Austria over 1.4 million, and Styria over 1.2 million. Of the rest, Tyrol has over 700,000, Carinthia and Salzburg both have over 500,000, Vorarlberg has over 300,000, and Burgenland has over 200,000 inhabitants. The capitals are Wien or Vienna for the federal state of Vienna, which is also Austria's capital, St. Pölten for Lower Austria, Linz for Upper Austria, Graz for Styria, Innsbruck for Tyrol, Klagenfurt for Kärnten or Carinthia, Salzburg for Salzburg, Bregenz for Vorarlberg, and Eisenstadt for Burgenland. So Austria's population is heavily concentrated on 4 federal states out of 9. And in terms of then the affiliations of the state premiers, Burgenland has a social democratic state premier, Hans-Peter Doskozil. Carinthia has a social democrat as well as its state premier, Peter Kaiser. Lower Austria has a state premier from the Austrian People's Party, Johanna Mikl-Leitner. Salzburg also has a state premier from the Austrian People's Party, Wilfried Haslauer Jr. Styria's state premier is Hermann Schützenhöfer from the Austrian People's Party. Tyrol's state premier is Günther Platter from the Austrian People's Party. Upper Austria's state premier is also from the Austrian People's Party, Thomas Stelzer. Vienna's mayor and at the same time state premier is Michael Ludwig from the Social Democrats, and Vorarlberg's state premier is Markus Wallner. Then in Germany, there are 16 states. Baden-Württemberg, which in December 2018 had over 11 million inhabitants. Bavaria or Bayern, which had over 13 million people in December 2018. Berlin, the capital, which had over 3 million people in December 2018. Then the surrounding federal state of Brandenburg or Brandenburg, that had over 2 million inhabitants in December 2018. Then Bremen, another city-state in Germany, which had over 600,000 people in December 2018. Hamburg or Hamburg, another city-state in Germany, which had over 1 million people in December 2018. Hesse or Hessen, which had over 6 million people in December 2018. Lower in December 2018, Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, which had over 1 million people in December 2018. North Rhine-Westphalia or North Rhine-Westphalen, which had over 17 million people in December 2018. Then Rhineland-Palatinate or Rhineland-Pfalz, which had over 4 million people in December 2018. Saarland, which had over 900,000 people in December 2018. Saxony or Sachsen, which had over 4 million people in December 2018. Saxony-Anhalt or Sachsen-Anhalt, which had over 2 million people in December 2018. Schleswig-Holstein, on the Danish border, it had over 2 million people in December 2018. And then Thuringia or Thüringen, which had over 2 million people in December 2018. Then the Ministerpräsidents or state premiers. Winfried Kretschmann of the Greens in Baden-Württemberg, Markus Söder of the Christian Social Union in Bavaria. The Christian Social Union is the Christian Democratic Union's sister party. Then Michael Müller in Berlin, he is a social democrat. Dietmar Woidke, another social democrat in Brandenburg. Andreas Boven-Schulte, another social democrat who serves as the state premier and at the same time as the mayor of Bremen, just like Michael Müller serves simultaneously as the state premier and mayor of Berlin. Then in Hamburg, the simultaneous state premier and mayor is Peter Tschentscher, who is a social democrat as well. In Hesse or Hessen, the state premier is Volker Bouffier, a Christian democrat. In Lower Saxony, the state premier is Stefan Weil, a social democrat. In Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, the state premier is Manuela Schwesig, a social democrat. In North Rhine-Westphalia or North Rhine-Westphalen, the state premier is Armin Laschet, a Christian democrat. In Rhineland-Palatinate or Rhineland-Pfalz, the state premier is Malu Dreyer, a social democrat. In Saarland, the state premier is Tobias Hans, a Christian democrat. In Saxony or Sachsen, the state premier is Michael Kretschmer, a Christian democrat. In Saxony-Anhalt or Sachsen-Anhalt, the state premier is Rainer Haseloff, a Christian democrat. In Schleswig-Holstein, the state premier is Daniel Günther, a Christian democrat. And in Thuringia or Thüringen, the state premier is Bodo Ramelov, a member of the Left Party. Then, Switzerland has the following cantons: Zürich, Bern, Luzern, Uri, Schwyz, Obwalden, Nidwalden, Glarus, Zug, Fribourg, Solothurn, Thurn, Basel-Stadt, Basel-Landschaft, Schaffhausen, Appenzell Ausserrhoden, Appenzell Innerrhoden, St. Gallen, Graubünden or Grison, Aargau, Thurgau, Ticino, Vaud or Waadt, I think in German, Valais, Neuchâtel, Geneva, and Jura. Yeah, in Germany, the state capitals are the following. Baden-Württemberg has Stuttgart, Bavaria has Munich or München. Then Berlin obviously is its own state capital. Brandenburg has Potsdam or Potsdam. Bremen is its own state capital. Hamburg likewise. Hesse or Hessen has Wiesbaden. Lower Saxony has Hanover. Mähren has Schwerin. North Rhine-Westphalia or North Rhine-Westphalen has Düsseldorf. Rhineland-Palatinate or Rhineland-Pfalz has Mainz. Saarland has Saarbrücken. Saxony or Sachsen has Dresden. Saxony-Anhalt or Sachsen-Anhalt has Magdeburg. Schleswig-Holstein has Kiel. And Thuringia or Thüringen has Erfurt. And in Geneva, the cantonal capitals are the following: Zürich, Bern, Lucerne, Altdorf, Schwyz, Sarnen, Stans, Glarus, Zug, Fribourg, Solothurn, Basel, Liestal, Schaffhausen, Herisau, Appenzell, St. Gallen, Chur, Aarau, Frauenfeld, Bellinzona, Lausanne, Sion, Neuchâtel, Geneva, Delémont. While the capital of Switzerland is then Bern. Only the following Swiss cantons have over 1 million inhabitants: Zurich and Bern. And on the other end of the scale, the following Swiss cantons have under 100,000 inhabitants. Quite many actually fall into that category: Uri, Obwalden, Nidwalden, Glarus, Schaffhausen, Appenzell Ausserrhoden, Appenzell Innerrhoden, and then Jura. So of the rest, the following have over 400,000 inhabitants: Luzern, St. Gallen, which also has over 500,000 inhabitants, Aargau, which has over 600,000 inhabitants, Vaud or Bath, which has over 700,000 inhabitants, and then Geneva. So the Swiss Federal Constitution declares the cantons to be sovereign to the extent that their sovereignty is not limited by federal law. So they are responsible for many other powers than the Swiss Confederation. It is responsible for the armed forces, in other words, the national defense or federal defense currency, the postal service, telecommunications, immigration into and emigration from Switzerland, granting asylum, conducting foreign relations with sovereign states, civil and criminal law, weights and measures, and customs duties. But each canton has its own constitution, legislature, executive, police, and courts. And in addition, the Swiss cantons have the following powers: healthcare, welfare, law enforcement, public education, and taxation. Each canton defines its official languages. Cantons can conclude treaties with other cantons, but also with foreign states. The cantonal constitutions determine how the cantons are organized. including how much self-government the cities and rural towns have, which varies but almost always includes the power to levy taxes and police forces. And then, this is one major difference, which I already mentioned, direct democracy. In other words, citizens' initiatives and then referendums on laws. So as at the federal level of Swiss Confederation, all cantons have some form of direct democracy. So citizens can demand a popular vote or referendum to change the cantonal constitutional laws or to veto laws or spending bills passed by the cantonal legislature. Other than in the instances of general popular assemblies in Appenzell Innerrhoden and Glarus, democratic rights are exercised by secret ballot. The right of foreigners to vote varies by cantons, as does whether Swiss citizens living outside the country and registered to vote in a canton can take part in cantonal voting. Swiss citizens are citizens of a particular municipality, meaning city or rural town, and the canton where that municipality belongs. Cantons therefore have a role in and set requirements for the granting of citizenship or naturalization, although the process is typically undertaken at a municipal level and is subject to the Swiss federal law. Switzerland has only one federal public holiday, August the 1st. Holidays other than that vary from canton to canton. Okay, let's look at the list of cantonal government. So in the canton of Zurich, there is a 7-member executive, or Regierungsrat, meaning the government council. And there is a 180-member cantonal council. The governing parties include the Swiss People's Party, the Social Democrats, the Free Democrats, the Greens, and the Christian People's Party, or Christian Democratic People's Party. 139 of the 180 legislators officially support the government parties. And currently the president or chairperson of the, or speaker of the cantonal council is Ms. Yvonne Bürgin-Hartmann, a Christian Democrat. In the Executive Council, the president or chairperson currently is Mr. Markus Kegi of the Swiss People's Party, also responsible for the Buildings Ministry. The vice president is Mr. Thomas Heiniger of the Free Democrats. The other members are Ms. Regine Epli, Mr. Mario Fair, both Social Democrats, Mr. Martin Graf, a Green, Ms. Ursula Gut-Winterberger, a Free Democrat, and then there's another Swiss People's Party member, Mr. Ernst Stocker. So let's look at the list of cantonal executives of Switzerland. The Aargau Executive Council is headed currently by Mr. Peter Bayeler, or maybe I'll have to, yeah. So this may not be up to date. Let's look at the French language Wikipedia. No. So in Aargau or Aargauwie, the current chairperson or president of the cantonal government is Mr. Markus Diet of the Christian Democratic Party. In Appenzell, Ausserrhoden. Yeah, Ausserrhoden. Or let's see. Yeah, I have to. Yeah, this may not be correct. Okay, here are the Aargau. Well, in any case, the following parties are represented in the Aargau cantonal government: Christian Democrats, Free Democrats, Social Democrats, Swiss People's Party, and Greens. Yeah. Well, in Aargau, anyway, the cantonal legislature has 140 members. The Swiss People's Party is the biggest one with 45 legislators. The Social Democrats have 27, the Free Democrats have 22, the Christian Democrats have 17, the Greens have 10, the Green Liberals have 7, the Evangelical People's Party has 6, the Conservative Democratic Party has 4, and the Federal Democratic Union has 2. So I would assume that the 4 or so main parties are also in the legislature. Let's look at the canton of Bern. The Great Council has 160 members. And the governing parties are the following: the Swiss People's Party, the Social Democrats, the Free Democrats, the Greens, and the Conservative Democrats. Then the canton of Luzern. or Lucerne has the cantonal council as its legislature. It has 120 members. Then in the canton of Uri, the executive has 7 members. The legislature, Landrat, or like state council, has 64 members. Then in the canton of Schwyz, the executive has 7 members. The legislature has 100 members. In the canton of Obwalden, there are 5 members in the executive or government council, and then 55 members in the cantonal council or legislature. In the canton of Nidwald, there are 7 members in the government council and then 60 members in the state or cantonal legislature. In the canton of Glarus, there are 5 members in the government council and then 60 cantonal legislators. In the canton of Zug, or Zug, there are 7 members in the government council and then 80 members in the legislature. In the canton of Fribourg, or Freiburg in German, there are 7 members in the executive council or the government, and then 130 members in the legislature. In the canton of Soleure or Solothurn, there are 5 members in the government council and then 100 members in the legislature. Then in the canton of Basel City, there are 7 members in the executive council and then 100 members in the legislature or the grand council. In the canton of Basel country, there are 5 members in the executive council and 90 members in the cantonal legislature. In the canton of Schaffhausen, there are 5 members in the executive council and 60 members in the legislature. And then in the canton of Appenzell Ausserrhoden, or Outer Rhode, or Rhodes, there are 7 members in the executive council and then 65 members in the legislature. And then in the canton of Appenzell Innerrhoden, there are 7 members in the executive commission or the cantonal government, and 49 members in the cantonal legislature. And then in the canton of St. Gallen, there are 7 members in the executive council and 180 members in the cantonal legislature. Then in the canton of Grisons, or Graubünden in German, there are 5 members in the executive council and 120 members in the cantonal legislature. Then in the canton of Aargau, which I already covered, 5 executive council members and 140 grand councillors or cantonal legislators. Then in the county of Thurgovia or Thurgau, in French Thurgovie, there are 5 members in the executive council and 130 members in the cantonal legislature. In the canton of Tessin or Ticino, there are 5 members in the Council of State or the cantonal government and 90 members in the cantonal legislature. Then in the county of Vaud or Vaud, there are 7 councillors or cabinet ministers and 150 cantonal legislators. In the canton of Valais, there are 5 executive councillors and 130 cantonal legislators. Then in the canton of Neuchâtel, there are 5 cabinet ministers and 115 legislators. Then in the canton of Geneva, there are 7 cabinet ministers and 100 legislators. And finally, in the canton of Jura, there are 5 cabinet ministers and 60 members of parliament. So, given the fact that Switzerland has under 9 million people, it has many directly elected legislators. Although, of course, we have to remember that numerically, the United States has still more. However, in terms of its, compared to its population, which is over 330 million, Switzerland has more elected legislators, because I haven't included the municipal councillors in this one, in this count. So federalism in Germany, it didn't start with the creation of the German Federal Republic in 1949, because officially the 2 previous regimes, Nazi Germany was a strictly unitary state which had Gaus or districts or regions, but the 2 preceding regimes, the Weimar Republic from 1919 to 1933 was a federal republic, and the Second German Empire was officially a federal monarchy with different federal states, and there were even 4 kingdoms, such as Prussia and Saxony. And then the so-called Holy Roman Empire, or Holy German Roman Empire, as it's called in the Finnish historiography, it was a collection of at most over 300 different kinds of principalities, like different countries inside this fairly loose empire. So federalism is nothing new in Germany, not even in Austria, because the first Austrian Republic from 1919 to or 1918 or 1919 to 1934, if we want to call it, or maybe 1938. Yeah, well, 1934, it was also a federal republic, because then there was that Catholic corporatist state from 1934 to 1938, and then the Anschluss, or Germany's annexation of Austria. And from 1938 to 1945, Austria was known as Ostmark, or Eastern Land. So the basic law or constitution of Germany divides authority between the federal government and the states, with the general principle governing relations articulated in its Article 30. Except as otherwise provided or permitted by this basic law, the exercise of state powers and the discharge of state functions is a matter for the Länder, or federal states. Therefore, the federal government can exercise authority only in those areas specified in the basic law. So this probably was designed in the late 1940s, when, in the wake of the brutal 12-year Nazi dictatorship, which had also been a devastating one for the local and regional autonomy or self-government, in order to prevent the German federal government in the future from becoming authoritarian or dictatorial. And this power has been, this goal has been largely reached in Germany. There haven't been that many disputes between the German federal states and the German federal government and parliament over matters of jurisdiction, fortunately, because there have been plenty of other disputes, and there are currently as well. So, the exclusive legislative jurisdiction of the German federal government, and therefore, of course, parliament, includes defense, foreign affairs, immigration, citizenship, communications, and currency standards. The German federal states, on the other hand, have the exclusive jurisdiction on the police, excluding federal police, or Bundespolizei, most of education, the press, freedom of assembly, public housing, corrections, meaning law enforcement and prisons, and media affairs, among others. However, even in cases where the states do have exclusive jurisdiction, they sometimes choose to work with each other and come to a basic agreement with the other states, which is then passed by the 16 state parliaments and thereby enshrined into law nationwide. This is to avoid legal patchworks. So in order to have more coordinated and organized legislation, rather than each one of the separate state legislatures passing same kinds of laws over same kinds of jurisdictions. An example of this is the state's online gambling regulations network. In the areas of nature conservation, university degrees, and university admission, among others, state laws can deviate from federal laws. Then the federal and state powers overlap in several areas, including business law, civil law, welfare, taxation, consumer protection, public holidays, and public health. However, in many concurrent powers, state laws only remain in effect as long as there are no federal laws that contradict their contents. However, the passage of such federal laws can be subject to additional legal requirements as stipulated by Article 72, Section 2. International relations, including international treaties, are primarily the federal government's and parliament's responsibility. However, as in many other federations, especially if they are democratic and decentralized ones, the constituent states have limited powers in this area. As provided in Article 23, 24, and even 32 of the Basic Law, or those articles, the states or Länder have the right to send representatives at the federal level through the Bundesrat or Federal Council, the German Federal Parliament's upper house, in matters of international relations that affect them, including the transfer of sovereignty or power to international organizations and with the federal government's consent. The German federal states have limited powers to conclude international treaties. Some older treaties between German states and other countries also are still in force. The Bavarian-Austrian Salt Treaty of 1829 is the oldest European treaty still in effect. In 1957, the state government of Bavaria used a revision of the treaty to actively claim the state's rights against the will and claims of the federal government. Let's see. Okay. How about Austria? So each Austrian state has its own elected legislature, a state government, and a premier or Landeshauptmann. However, Austria is compared to, for example, Switzerland, especially Switzerland, where the cantons have extensive self-government, and also compared to Germany, where the federal states have quite wide powers. Austria is a fairly centralized federal state, a kind of oxymoron or contradiction in terms. While the federal constitution at first granted all legislative powers to the Austrian federal states, many of these have been later eroded. Criminal, civil, corporate law, defense policy, most economic policies, and most educational and healthcare policies are regulated by the Austrian federal government and parliament. Consequently, Austria's federalism is usually characterized as being highly centralized. Many Austrians have pushed to strengthen federalism in this Central European nation, and this actually, the thought just crossed my mind, this actually may be one of the reasons why right-wing populism has, since the 1990s, won so many converts, although the most recent federal elections in 2019, in the wake of the scandalous Ibiza affair, significantly eroded the Austrian Freedom Party's support. And there was a corresponding increase in the Austrian People's Party's support, because the current federal chancellor, Sebastian Kurz, has skillfully talked of issues of concern to many moderate Austrian voters, and then even those who are leaning to vote towards voting for the Austrian Freedom Party. So in effect, he has stolen various themes, for example, the need to control illegal immigration and the need to be more fiscally frugal and to respect national traditions without, however, appearing to be racist or an ethnocentrist. And so the Austrian People's Party both in the 2017 and the 2019 federal parliamentary elections, was able to perform so well. And especially in the most recent federal elections, largely at the expense of the Austrian Freedom Party. But anyway, this desire by many ordinary Austrians to have more self-government for their federal states has probably contributed also to the demand for more populist right-wing policies at the federal and state levels, despite the fact that not a single current state premier in Austria is a member of the Austrian Freedom Party. But that could, of course, change later in the 2020s. A constitutional convention established in 2003 made no major changes, although electoral reforms were enacted. Therefore, Austria remains a country of unitary federalism, that is, one in which regional power is clearly subordinated to federal power, which has led some people question whether it's wise to have separate state parliaments and governments. So let's look at Austrian federalism in comparative perspective. Because this video has lasted already for a long time, I'll try to summarize this. Edited by Günther Bischoff and Ferdinand Karlhofer. Published by Innsbruck University Press. So copyright, from 2015. But this is an educational video, so I'm not trying to break or violate copyrights in any way. With its ambiguous mix of weak federalist and strong centralist elements, the Austrian constitutional architecture or structure has been subject to conflicting interpretations and claims from its very beginning. The written 1920 constitution has been paralleled by informal rules and forces, making up for the imbalance of power between national and subnational authorities. Understanding these inherent weaknesses, virtually all political actors involved are well aware that reforming the allocation of rights and duties between the different levels in the federal state is urgently needed. In recent years, several initiatives of recalibrating the system of power sharing between the different levels of government have been initiated. So far, progress has been modest, yet the reform process is still underway. Seen from an international perspective, the Austrian case is to be located at the edge of the comparative matrix of federal systems. Unlike the United States and small Switzerland, and let us note, neighboring Switzerland, Austria has no history of sovereign states coming together of their own free will to form a federation. Rather, the country's federal constitution was the result of a more or less chaotic process of cobbling together the German-speaking crown lands left over from the crumbling Austro-Hungarian Empire's remains. It was truly a multi-ethnic one, multi-linguistic and multicultural one, but also an authoritarian dictatorship, where there were major and growing tensions between different ethnic groups, especially between many members of the Slavic minorities, such as Poles, Czechs, Hungarians, Ruthenians or Ukrainians, and then Slovenes, Croats, Bosniaks, and Serbs, who demanded a greater self-government. And indeed, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who, along with his non-imperial morganatic wife, Countess Sophie von Chotek, was assassinated by a Bosnian Serb nationalist, Mr. Gavrilo Princip, in 1914 in Sarajevo, which was one of the immediate causes of the First World War. But if Franz Ferdinand had lived to actually govern Austria-Hungary, he at least claimed to have wanted to push for the introduction of autonomy or self-government for the uh, multinational empires, many Slavic peoples, ironically, in order to strengthen the federation. Because his shrewd idea was to give so much self-government to these Slavic um, subjects or citizens of Austria-Hungary that most of them would lose their interest in pushing for a full independence, which was actually one of the main motives of the Black Hand uh, pan-Serbian terrorist organization to murder him. Because the old Emperor Franz Joseph, even though he was a fairly popular and definitely very diligent emperor, definitely opposed giving any kind of organized and wide self-government to his empire's many Slavic subjects. So